Hi, thanks for joining us. This is eLearnChat. Normally you would be seeing Rick Zanotti here, but he is traveling. My name is Adam Weisblatt, and I have with me the unstoppable and always wise and well-connected Leslie Price. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Adam. Great to be here. And although it's very sad that Rick can't join us tonight, he's actually on the way to the UK to help Learn Appeal, the charity I work for, out on the Learn Appeal stand at the Learning Technology Show next week in London. So let's go. eLearnChat up and running with our good friend Trish Uhl.
Hey, Trish, great to see you.
Hi, Trish.
Hey, how are you? It's good to see you both.
Great.
It's been a while.
Yep, I actually feel like I just got to see you because I saw you on the streaming from the TLDC conference. You were great. You had a lot of really fascinating, really excited about hearing continuing the conversation.
Oh, thanks, Adam. No, I really appreciate that. That was quite a good time in Phoenix last week at the Training, Learning, and Development Conference, otherwise known as the TLDC. Yeah, it was a really good time. What really stood out for you with it? I mean, I did yeah.
Well, you know, for decades, people have been saying how things that are going on are going to shake up learning and development, but you really laid out a case for how this concept of, and I love this term, ambient intelligence, where we have information all around us. The distance between work and then learning and going back to work is very different. You were talking before we came on about the economics of it. We're not, doing transactions of creating products. We're actually creating the experiences of sharing information, and that whole dynamic, you were showing how that's going to really change L&D. But, we've, as Leslie had said, we've been down this road before. Is L&D really going to come along with us?
I don't
would love
know.
To hear more.
That's a really good question, and I would say that ultimately we're going to have to. I mean, so for those of us that want to stay in the field of practice for L&D, we're going to have to get on board with this, because what's different about what's happening with this wave of technology and these waves of globalization is they're not limited to just L&D. I mean, this isn't like new authoring tools and new learning management systems. I mean, we're talking about ambient intelligence, we're talking about IoT, which is the Internet of Things, we're talking about hyperconnectivity with, really high speed bandwidth, internet bandwidth with 5G, being pervasive around the world. So there's all of these different technologies, and again, these sweeps of globalization and other drivers that are impacting the entire world, much less L&D. So the pressure this time around is coming in from the outside, right? So the destructive forces, if you will, and destruction is one of the words that I really like to use, and deconstruction is actually coming in from, the external into the internal and coming into our field of practice.
So, Trish, I understand AI, I understand learning analytics, but what is ambient intelligence? Because I think that maybe some of the people who will be watching this will be thinking, and what is that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Leslie, and especially since I started out with like the apocalyptic future of L&D, so perhaps I should back things up just a little bit of a step. So ambient intelligence is basically being able to have responsive machines around us that are responding to data in the surrounding environment. So that's what ambient is. We probably are familiar with the word ambient in and of itself in other contexts. Like we think about ambient sound, like whenever it is that we're trying to do some kind of a recording like this, there inevitably seems to be some kind of ambient noise that's happening in the background that's, could be distracting. We think about ambient music. So ambient music would be like surround sound and being like really immersed. And so ambient being from the surrounding environment. And ambient intelligence is a combination of things that are now collectively coming together. So collectively coming together is not only that ambient data, right? So data that's available in the surrounding environment, but it's also new devices. It's the analytical capability. It's the analytical capability being driven by the AI, the artificial intelligence horsepower, right? To be able to just process huge amounts of data and different types of data that these new devices are beginning to collect from the surrounding environment. And then you put that all together with the hyperconnectivity of, again, really, really advanced high-speed internet connectivity. And so what's happening is the machines are responding to the conditions that are changing in the environment as they're changing based on this, you know, just like kind of intergalactic horsepower. And some of the examples I think that we have in every day, and of course we've just gotten past some of the holidays at the end of last year. You know, has anybody gotten a smart speaker, like an Echo device, which I remembered to actually turn mine off for this cast today, but like a smart speaker or like a Nest thermostat? Do you guys have either of those types of items? Do you have something like that at home?
Yes.
I just have Siri.
You've got Siri.
Cool.
Oh, I have Alexa. I've switched Alexa off. And well, I hope I've switched her off. Otherwise, if I mention her name and I then tell her what I want to play, she will just do it now.
Right. Right.
Right,
exactly.
How does that fit in? You know, what you were saying before, you know, I understand it. I understand the language that you're using. But many people who are involved in learning and development will not have a clue about the language that you've been using, because it really does sound quite technical. So,
and you're right, and it is new
in layman's terms.
Yeah, I absolutely can. And I'll do that in just a second. And so Adam, you were going to say something about Siri or something about your experience with Ambient?
Well, I was just going to say, I was talking to my coworkers earlier today. They were talking about, you know, how you can have these conversations with Siri. If you ask her what her favorite color is, she'll say, well, it's not on the visible spectrum, or things like that. And you know, it all seems very clever, and AI seems very new. But in the 1950s and 60s, they had a guy that was a psychologist, and it would say, "Oh, what do you think about X?" And so that little kind of parlor trick of basically tricking human beings into thinking things had more personality than they actually do is part of it. But I actually want to know what you think of what Leslie said, because it's something I struggle with a lot. How do you get the language of technology? Because it is technology. I mean, what's going on is technical. How do you get that into a language that other people in L&D can jump onto?
Well, I think part of it is to start from the end application, right? So what's the use case and where is it familiar? Like what things are happening in our environments right now, perhaps in our home lives, certainly in our consumer lives, and then how do we kind of take that and reverse engineer it, if you will, and then take a look at the application to L&D. So if we go back to these devices, so Adam, like what you were just talking about with ELIZA, which was the tool that was around in the 1960s that was created to actually do some talk therapy with people. You know, so we've got some entities, if you will, that have existed for a while of being able to recognize at least some form of language. And we know that now part of the sophistication with these devices, the reason why, you know, when I ask my Alexa device to play Duran Duran or to play George Michael, now we can all tell what decade I was a teenager in, or to play Sting, and she or it understands me, that's natural language processing, which is actually something that's facilitated and enabled by artificial intelligence. Before we had the maturity in artificial intelligence that we have today, it wouldn't have understood the Echo device, and Google Home or those types of devices would not have understood the natural language, right? So as Leslie was just saying, she can just say over her shoulder, give the Alexa device some kind of a command, and it understands, or it seems to understand, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then it just goes ahead and it responds. And that's different than having to code like every potential word or every potential phrase that a human being might actually say, which is kind of the parlor trick that you were alluding to that was kind of happening before. We didn't have that capability for the machines to be able to, again, I'm going to use learn in air quotes, because we'll talk in a moment about what artificial intelligence is actually doing with NLP, because it kind of helps frame this a little bit better. But then it's the same thing with Siri. So I want to go back to Siri for a moment, because I know not everybody has a smart speaker. But with Siri, do you ever leave Siri on, Adam? And do you like have to hit the home button on your device in order to activate her, or do you have her so that she's always sort of monitoring for when it is that you call for her or it?
In the car, I'll say, "Hey Siri, read my text." So yeah.
Okay. So there's a listening component.
I am the complete opposite. I absolutely switch off any listening, any Siri, anything, because I am also very aware of some of the things that go on where your records are kept where they shouldn't necessarily be kept, and in the UK we call it data protection. I don't know what you call it in the US, but I
Thursday. We call it Thursday.
I am very, 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 and I am the techie geek. I operated my first computer in 1974. And now I'm taking e-learning to places where they don't even have the internet. So I understand technology, and I am very aware about internet security, internet safety, and the way that people use it where they don't really understand the implications.
Absolutely. Yeah. Adam, did you have something to add?
No, I just said it's true. I did want to ask you, have you been working with groups that have used these platforms for learning? So like the Alexa platform has the ability to create sort of, to teach Alexa to be able to teach other people. Have you seen people doing that?
Yes, to a certain degree. And let me table that just for a second, because I just want to go back to two things that you both have now brought up and kind of confirmed. So one is this whole idea about, of course, data privacy and data protection, and that we have these vast differences really in different places in the world. And of course, EU citizens now have extra protection or protections based on laws that went into effect in May of last year. So there is definitely considerations about ethical practice, ethical use, and ethical access to people's data. And those regulations and laws are going to vary depending on whose data you have and who's trying to access it. And so that is a big concern. And I want to address it, and then I just want to take that and just table it for a moment and talk a little bit more about how the technologies work, and then come back for a second, Adam, and then circle back and answer the question about how it's being applied to L&D. Because so that whole idea of turning on the device, and I can appreciate the times that you turn it off, right? That we turn off the devices and we don't want them listening for our wake word, for our command. again, totally appreciate that. But at the time, like Adam, when you were talking about turning on Siri in the car so that as you're driving, especially if you're commuting a longer distance or you're driving on some kind of a road trip or going to visit friends or family, you know, you've got Siri available to respond to your voice command so that you can actually stay in touch and communicate, and not only be able to have Siri at your voice command read a text message to you, but then also respond to a person. So it kind of breaks the four walls of the automobile at that particular point, because you're able to have this functionality in a safe way while you're operating a vehicle by being able to converse, if you will, with the device, with Siri in this way, who then is translating what you said to her or it, and then putting that into text and then sending that off to another human being. Or maybe you're talking to a bunch of chatbots, but we can get into all of that. But that whole thing about the ability of it being able to listen for when it is that you call, that's ambient. That's where the ambient intelligence comes into. So when it's monitoring the environment for when conditions change, when we speak, when I say Alexa into the air and I have her in listening mode, she'll automatically respond because the conditions in that case have changed. And her or its ability to be able to recognize that I am going to give it a command is artificial intelligence. And it's a particular kind of artificial intelligence, again, that goes back to natural language processing, so NLP. Now, the thing that's really interesting about that we should understand, especially as learning practitioners, is the devices, even though they call that machine learning, it's a type, so NLP, natural language processing, is a type of machine learning, which is a type of artificial intelligence. Even though the word learning is in there and the word intelligence is in there, it's actually really not either of those things. And the reason why I say that is that it's helpful to understand that what these things are, what artificial intelligence is right now, is really good prediction machines. And so when I speak to Alexa and ask her to play Duran Duran, she's predicting that that's what I said. So she's using math that's been built into the analytical models that are running as part of the NLP, artificial intelligence, to basically say, okay, I think with a high level of confidence that this is what was said, and then goes ahead and automatically takes that action and plays, you know, I don't know, Hungry Like the Wolf. So just saying. Not that I would know for sure, but it's predicting, and that's significant in understanding. Now, it can get better. The more that it converses with humans, it learns, again, I'm using air quotes, over time, so that it has more data, which allows it to predict better. And I'll give you a quick example. One of the other ways that I access Alexa all the time is to add things to my grocery shopping list, right? And it's been interesting. I've been very attentive in paying attention to words that she didn't recognize before and now recognizes. So like the word Listerine, right? So here in the United States, Listerine is a type of, you know, mouthwash for good dental hygiene. Now, why on earth, you know, so again, that to me is kind of like, that's not a programmed parlor trick. Like no programmer sat around and said, well, one day Trish Uhl in her Chicago area home is going to ask this Echo device to add this, you know, weird sounding word Listerine to her shopping list. And there was a human who actually scripted it. It had to learn how to predict that word over time based on, you know, probably a gazillion conversations with multiple humans.
Okay, so, right, I'm coming back to you on this one. I'm coming back to you on this one now, Trish. NLP. What does NLP mean to you? What does it stand for?
So in terms of AI, it stands for natural language processing.
NLP, the three initials, NLP. What does that mean to you? Do you mean... I'm not sure where you're driving at. Are we staying on the... You used an anagram, NLP. You use three initials,
Uh-huh.
NLP. What does NLP mean?
Natural language processing.
Right. To me,
So,
it doesn't. It means neuro-linguistic programming, which is
right.
a completely and utterly different, not only different language, different field that we're talking about. So if you were to come into an L&D department and you were to talk about NLP, they would probably think you were talking about neuro-linguistic programming, which is, goes back to the 1970s and was all about different kinds of therapies that people went through, and neurology and everything else. And what I'm trying to say is that when we use language in learning and development, we need clarity. And what you're talking about, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but what you're talking about, NLP, is very different to what a lot of other people would understand NLP is.
So you're right, Leslie, in the context, because you're absolutely right. It has to do with the language context. But here's the interesting piece. It depends on the geography. So here in the United States, right, even though it's Bander's work that, went with NLP, and that's actually where we got some of the models like VAC and so on and so forth, is actually from that entire body of work. Here, NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, is actually not a big practice here in the United States. And the actual acronym of the letters NLP here in the United States in reference to AI, and around the world, when you're using it in context to AI, that is the actual name, is natural language processing. That's actually the official name, and they do call it by those letters. But I can totally appreciate that in front of the UK, in front of a European audience, if I were in India, pretty much anywhere except for the United States that was a British colony at one point, which is like everywhere, right?
Well,
like most
actually,
places.
I've just done a quick search on Wikipedia, and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, actually originated in California.
I know Bander's work came out of the United States, but it's not well adopted here. So you don't run into...
saying is, I think we need to find somewhere, somehow, certainly what I've found in my career is we need to find a common language that people understand.
But L&D people are notorious for this, using the same terms for different things. Are we in a class or a session, or a course or a module? I mean, we're the worst at that kind of stuff. And
I totally agree.
What you're saying is that as we're getting this community to adopt these ideas, we have to be conscious of things like that, which I think is smart. I was going to ask you,
common language is important.
Yeah, sort of along the same lines, Trish. I was going to ask you, because you were talking about Alexa being able to learn the word Listerine, right? And I think people in the general feel this way, but I wonder in L&D if there's this feeling that, because Alexa can learn what Listerine means, that Alexa is actually a thing that knows that you want to use mouthwash because you are worried about your breath and you've bought the brand, you're interested in the brand Listerine, where Alexa doesn't know any of that. Alexa just knows there's a vibration in the air, and that vibration in the air is corresponding with your desire to have this particular item. It's all numbers, and I think we sometimes think these things that we're interacting with are more than just software.
Well, exactly. And to your point, Adam, I mean, and this is why going back and really thinking about artificial intelligence as what is it? I mean, at the end of the day, it's really cheap and becoming really more inexpensive prediction, ability to be able to predict. So again, to your point, with the example you just gave, the word Listerine is the sound vibrations in the air that hit the speaker, and it then running the algorithms that it's running actually predicts that the thing that it quote unquote heard is in closest proximity with a statistical significance, you know, a high level of confidence that this was the word that I said. And the reason why that's important in it predicting it, because then it has to actually translate it into the written word and then add it to my list. So later on when I'm at the grocery store and now I'm on my phone and I bring up my Alexa app and I have my, you know, list of grocery items, does it spell Listerine correctly, or at least enough of a close proximity for me, the human who's now trying to shop, to understand that's what I asked it to add to the list. And it amazes me that it can recognize that word regardless of my intonation, because now I mess with the thing, right? So now I try different tonality, I haven't gotten to the point of trying different voices, but you know, can it understand me in different contexts saying that particular word, which again to me is not, you know, not necessarily a common, not so common as, you know, dog or cat or house or, you know, something else. But if we think about that this is cheap prediction, then we can go back and think about the 1990s and computers coming into the office space. The computers are cheap math, right? I mean, that's what the computers are. So we suddenly had this machine, this device that could do math faster in some ways than humans to be able to give us these different functionalities and these different capabilities. And now we have these devices that are using this thing called artificial intelligence that can do cheap prediction really, really fast. And not only can it predict language and predict multiple languages, right? So now, like the Amazon as an example, they've rolled it out in France, they've rolled it out in Italy. I mean, it's beginning to understand or predict more and more languages, but it can also, artificial intelligence, another flavor of artificial intelligence, if you will, is computer vision and image recognition. And again, it doesn't know, it doesn't learn like we as humans learn. It just gets really good at predicting, hey, this was an image, and I think that image most closely, you know, matches this other image, and therefore I'm predicting this is the output. And that image recognition sophistication that's happening now is the thing on our phones that suddenly, like, auto-magically, like putting our photos into albums based on the people that are featured or the location that's featured. I mean, have you noticed that happening like in the past 18 months, that suddenly our smartphones have this ability of being able to categorize these different albums that are based on what's in the content of the image rather than the metadata about it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't allow it. I don't allow access. So no.
Yeah, mine isn't working because I have identical twins, and it's totally confused.
Oh.
Yeah, and I simply don't allow it. I don't allow, because I have seen too many situations where things have been taken, right? Okay, I'm going back to the old-fashioned learning thing. There is content and there is context. And everybody used to say back in, you know, in inverted commas, as you would say, Trish, the olden days, everybody used to say content is king. My argument is that context is king. Yeah. And I think, whilst I think AI is getting there, I am not yet, and and obviously I know, I'm very good friends with Donald Clark, who is very into AI, into AI in a big way. But
That's an
I
understatement.
think even he says that it's not just all about content; it's about context, and AI hasn't quite got there with context, and that's why I won't allow apps to access what I do, because the context could potentially be wrong, and that can have huge implications when you take things out of context.
That's why humans aren't going to go away, because humans are good at context.
Yes, but the point that I want to drive at with that is that capability on our phones right now for people who are having that experience, right? So for many consumers that around the world, that's an experience that we're having. We're watching where one day we woke up and our phones are suddenly creating these albums and they're sorting our photos by the content, what's actually featured in the photo rather than the metadata or the tags about the photo. And that capability is image recognition. And that's fairly new. I mean, it's only about 18 months ago that artificial intelligence wasn't sophisticated enough to tell the difference between a bagel and a curled up dog. And now it can tell the difference, because if you think about it, the shape, right, and it actually doesn't even really see the shape. We recognize shapes, that the shape of the dog and the shape of the bagel, but the bits on the back end to the computer look like the same patterns. And now if we extend that out, the capability that's beginning to happen in our real world, so that's one thing that it's happening on our phones, but now that same technology is what's giving Amazon the ability to set up these cashierless stores. So if you've heard about the Amazon Go stores, we have one here in Chicago now.
Yeah.
And so you can walk in as a consumer. There are you walk in, you actually just go ahead and you have your Amazon app on your smartphone. It picks you up, right, with a geofence when you walk into the store. It knows that Trish Uhl just entered the store, ties me to my Amazon account. I go ahead and shop, right? So I take things off the shelf and I put them in my, basket, and then, or in my bag, and then it automatically charges my Amazon account when it is that I walk out of that store. There's not a cashier, there's no scanning, I don't have to identify what the items are, and all of that works with cameras. And the point about that is, again, if we go back to thinking about ambient intelligence, is you now have this array of cameras that are all around this store that are not only doing image recognition on a person's facial features, but also image recognition of the goods that you just took off the shelf and the fact that you took that action. And think about how fast those cameras have to be able to process that data, right? That image data, to be able to correctly, recognize a particular individual and then charge that particular individual's account for the right products. And
Remind me never ever to go into an Amazon store like that.
I was about to say,
in
LegalChat.
I actually think, and in the UK, I don't know if you've seen it on the television, but in the UK, there is a huge issue at the moment regarding what is online, what is not online, the damage that it's actually doing to young people with self-harm, with images, with things being projected and put up immediately. And there comes a point, I'm all for technology. I'm big on technology. But there comes a point where you just have to say, actually, No.
So here's the thing.
I'm afraid
it's going to get worse.
You and I are going to have to disagree.
Well, I don't have to disagree, but I think this is where it's really important. And this, I always think of the Harry Potter reference in my head. And I actually had a similar conversation with grad students at Concordia University in Montreal. And again, these concerns are really, really valid. I mean, obviously, we are experiencing these types of negative consequences of the technology in many ways outpacing our ability of being able to manage it in sometimes healthy ways. No disagreement there. And that's why it's so critical. And this is again why I think about Harry Potter, that we learn and teach our children to have defense against the dark arts. Right? So, you know, Leslie, going back to what you were talking about with neurolinguistic programming, if you take NLP, which to me, I know a lot of people here in the United States poo-poo, NLP, and they think that, there's no research and whatever. I don't know. I've seen some pretty powerful marketing stuff that's based on NLP, the neurolinguistic programming, and you marry that with this kind of technology, and at a certain point, I think you're no longer influencing people's buying decisions. You're out and out hacking human beings and hacking their behavior. And again, no disagreement. And we can do a whole show on exactly those types of challenges and the negative side of a lot of these technologies that are happening. But I think what I'd really like to do for today is just really focus on how does any of this silly stuff work, right? So that we can begin to have a primer, or a primer, as you would say in the UK, that gives us some foundational elements and some basics to understand what's happening so that we can make those types of choices about these devices and these technologies and be able to protect ourselves, our children, our families, and our communities. And not only protect, but then also leverage, because there's a whole positive side to all of this stuff as well. And one last point, just going back to the Amazon Go stores for a moment.
I'm afraid, Trish, this will have to be your last point because we've now run out of time. So we only do the show for half an hour. So I'm afraid this will, it'll be lovely. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, but this will have to be the last point.
Okay, and that's just that Amazon isn't the only one that's doing these shopping experiences. As a matter of fact, they have a competitor in Japan that has also become this is what surprised me. I mean, the focus here in the States, of course, has been on Amazon doing these cashierless stores, the Amazon Go stores. But there's one in Japan that's so far along right now that they have the contract to roll out this kind of capability for the Tokyo Olympics in 3,000 retail stores, again, in time for the Olympics. So the level of technology and sophistication and the accuracy of the prediction to be able to handle that kind of a crowd gives us a trajectory or an idea of how fast this stuff is accelerating and how fast it's maturing. So that's my final point for today.
Anyway, it's been lovely to talk to you, Trish. But I'm afraid we're going to have to finish up before Harold actually shuts us off.
And thank you, Trish. This is great stuff and great material to think about.
Thanks, Adam.
Anyway.
Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah, and I'll see you next week, my lovely girl.
Absolutely. Yay, cake.
Yeah. Okay, take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.